How many just love abalone steak? You eat all the good food. Your hands first up. I'm proud of you. Yeah, the seafoods, like the little surffish, we call them surffish, abalone, and seaweed, salmon, steelhead, the sea trout, and there's a what they call a candlefish. I don't know the tribal name, but that's probably Cheryl may know. And I fished with friends up on the Klamath River at night when they had a fire, and they would have dip nets, and these candlefish are about this long. They look like the surffish, but these little surffish are only about maybe 5 or 6 inches long. So those are good food too. And then how about eels? Anyone ever eat the lamprey eel? You too. Wow. And you? Outstanding. That food is also provided by God this time of the year, and it is such a great health food that it's loaded with omega-3, omega-6, omega-9 that all our scientists now are saying we need the omega oils in our system to keep our arteries and veins clean from the terrible red meat fats. So, and it's exciting to catch those eels traditionally. People used to make baskets. They'd weave big baskets, maybe about this big around and about this long, and with willows so close that nothing could get through them except for maybe a tiny little trout or minnow. And then they would use those long grapevines. Maybe you've seen grapevines go clear to the top of some of these oak trees. They pull those grapevines down, and that would be the cable that they would tie to those baskets. But the basket would be round, and then it would be flat in the front. Totally, the willows would be so flat that the water couldn't get through there. So when water hits something, it causes a swirling, what I call a back eddy, and the water goes around it and spins around like this. But on the inside, they would weave another, it looked like a triangle, but it's a cylindrical triangle. Get into your math and geometry, and they would put that in there, and right on the end of that triangle would be a little hole about that big around. It would be just big around enough for the eel to come into that back, and that hole would be back to the front about this far, so that the eels would come through and go through that hole, and so they would be inside that space between the big cylinder and the triangular cylinder. So they could come in that whole open area, because all the fish, when they get into a back eddy, that's where the water swirls and it kind of has an upstream current. So they get in there and they rest. People ask me where I fish traditionally with my net. I said I fish where the water runs upstream. How many of you have seen a big hole where the water is just bubbling back on one side like this? Well, where it bubbles back, I mean, you could swim in there and you could just kind of float upstream a ways and then hit the current and then go back down in there again. Well, I put my net just like that, where that water's swirling around like that, so the steelhead that are tired and need rest, they come in there and then they get trapped in the net. But the stronger, you've heard the expression, the strongest survive. The stronger fish are more alert. They can sense the net there, and they'll drift back and go around the end and just swim real hard right up through the main current. So that was a way, biologically, to make sure that the strongest fish stayed in the rivers and the streams, because they only caught the tired, and the weaker ones or the ones that were less alert. And metaphorically, that happens to us too as we're growing up. You know, sometimes we get into a back eddy, we can't get out of it, and we get ourselves into trouble because we're not paying attention enough and not being alert enough. What else could we cover on the meats? Fish and birds, you know, ducks and geese, quail, grouse, wild turkeys. you know, they all were so much more nutritious than what we buy out of the market today, because, you know, the poultry farms, they inject growth hormones into their chickens, and they breed them so that they will grow up faster and become a certain size and be ready for the market. And unfortunately, what happens when people start messing with genetics is that they'll do genetic engineering until, like the fryer is a male chicken, but by the time they get it to what they want in size and how fast they can get to that size, suddenly they find that that chicken cannot reproduce. They just kill the reproductive system of the animal. And they've done that in plants too. Like a lot of the hybridized corn. It tastes very sweet, it grows fast, you get bigger corn kernels. But if you save some of those seeds from that corn and plant it, it won't grow. So they have destroyed the genetic ability to reproduce. Okay, how many of you have eaten what our old timers, now I'm calling it the first American potato, is from what's called a camas plant. It's a little bulb, maybe about the size of a golf ball. That would be a full-grown camas plant, or what people call the Indian potato. And I'm calling the first American potato because that same potato got sent to Europe when Irish people were starving, and they started growing that potato, and they were hybridizing it until it got bigger and bigger. And in 100 years, their population doubled because they had potatoes, or, you know, no more starvation. And you can think of tomatoes and squash and chili peppers. All of those came from the Americas, or this Western Hemisphere. Now, tomatoes in Italy, people think that that's always been there, but tomato is a plant from the United States, or not just the United States, but this whole Western Hemisphere. So how many have tried acorn mush or acorn soup? You get all the good foods at home. That's what I call tribal soul foods. when you could eat, you know, all the organic things that are growing around us. That's what I call our tribal soul food. And as I said earlier, the more that good food we eat and the more exercise we get, the healthier we're going to be in body strength and in mind and thinking ability. How many of you go out and help your elders gather acorns? You do too, huh? All right. Good. Yeah, it's a chore, but you know, it's worth it. The acorn has what they would call a tannic acid that also is a cleansing agent for any kind of parasite that might be in the digestive system of the body. It goes through and it nourishes your body, and there's enough of the toxic acid that if there's any kind of parasite in the body, it just murders it. Your body will get rid of it. So did you go to school? And if so, what subjects did you learn? I learned everything that you're learning right here in this grade level. At the reservation school, we didn't have a kindergarten. We started at 6 years old in the first grade, and so it was first through the 8th grade before we came to the high school. But all of the basic reading process was about the same. The math has changed considerably, but as I said, we learned the 3 R's. What I didn't appreciate though was the history books, where the California history book in the 3rd grade just kind of try to destroy the spirit of all of us first Americans sitting in the classroom, because almost every chapter they were referring to they say Indians, but that's the wrong term, because Columbus didn't know where he was going, thought he was in India. So the real Indians are from India. You know, the real people are first Americans from this hemisphere. But just terrible terms, disparaging terms, when they would describe the original people of California were used, and you know, that's really belittling to, you know, any of our psyches to be called terrible names. I don't want to even repeat some of those terrible terms that they had in those history books. But luckily, people and committees and all started fighting against the language used in those books, and so the latest ones are much better, and treat all nationalities as human beings. Otherwise, they're just treating them as people, and maybe a lot of times referring to them as being subhuman. You have a question?
Did they eat buffalo?
When we had them here, but buffalo were not naturally in this part of the Americas. They didn't come across the Rocky Mountains, so they stayed in the Great Plains all the way up to Canada and clear down into New Mexico and Texas. But most of them were probably from the Dakotas and through, on both sides of the Mississippi River, there were buffalo. There were smaller buffalo on the eastern part of the United States, on that side of the Mississippi. But we have, I think, 19 buffalo now in our herd. But it's good. You know, it's mighty nutritious. Makes great jerky. How many in here have eaten jerky of any kind? All store-bought? How many have eaten deer jerky? Wow, amazing. How about elk jerky? You too. How many for buffalo jerky? You have too, yes. Years ago when we first got to buffalo, we had mostly bulls and only a few heifers or cows, so our tribe had some community feasts where we would slaughter the big bulls, and I'd save the hide and make robes out of the hides and have the heads mounted, and we'd let the buffalo hang in teeth butcher shops for at least 2 weeks, so it'll be a little more tender, and then butchered up and have a big feast for the community. And one time I bought 80 pounds of buffalo meat from the tribe for about $3 a pound, which is a good price. When I buy beef and make beef jerky now, I still pay right at $3 a pound for a big chunk of rump roast for beef jerky. And I wish I had some made here today. I would have been passing it out to you, but I don't. The buffalo holds so much water in their system that 80 pounds of meat in the smokehouse, after it was dried and ready to eat, it weighed only 14 pounds. But 80 pounds of deer jerky, which is, you know, much more solid flesh, I would get probably 22 pounds of deer jerky out of the same weight.